I never saw myself as someone who held grudges, but that was before my sister Tara decided to ruin my life over something as trivial as me ordering a meal in a hospital cafeteria. You might think it sounds ridiculous, but I swear it's the truth. Up until that point, I believed family was the one unwavering constant in my life. A safe harbor, you know? Then again, illusions tend to shatter at the most unexpected moments. My father was there in the waiting room, pacing nervously because our aunt was being wheeled into emergency surgery. Mom was trying to look calm, but her eyes gave away her tension. And Tara, golden child that she was, managed to frame my simple choice to grab a burger as some colossal betrayal. I remember the look in her eyes, cold, judgmental, triumphant, like she'd been waiting for any chance to make me look bad. That hospital trip was supposed to be about supporting Aunt Valerie. She'd slipped on some icy stairs and shattered her ankle, and the surgery was serious enough to worry everyone. I was just trying to keep my own stress down, so I wandered to the cafeteria for a quick bite. No big deal, right? Except Tara saw it differently. She confronted me in front of Mom, claiming I was inconsiderate and insensitive to Aunt Valerie's pain. Did it matter that Aunt Valerie was under anesthesia and had no idea whether I was in the waiting room or not? Did it matter that Mom had literally told me to go get something to eat so I wouldn't faint from hunger? None of that registered for Tara. In her eyes, I was a selfish wrecking ball who couldn't even stand by the family in a critical moment. Her condemnation stung, I admitted. I remember walking back to the waiting area with my tray, hearing Tara's raised voice bouncing off the sterile hallway walls. She was telling Mom how unbelievably disrespectful I was, as if I'd strolled into Aunt Valerie's operating room carrying a tray of nachos and guacamole. When Dad joined the conversation, he just frowned and reminded everyone to stay calm. But Tara doesn't do calm when she's decided you're wrong. She insisted I was immature, oblivious, and lacking in empathy. Mom tried to diffuse the tension, but Tara had latched onto her role as moral authority. Ironically, she seemed to forget that she'd been on her phone playing a puzzle game just 5 minutes earlier instead of sitting vigil by Aunt Valerie. My blood boiled, but I tried to stay composed. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that losing your cool around Tara never ends well. Eventually, Aunt Valerie's surgery ended successfully, and we all breathed a collective sigh of relief. In the aftermath, Tara kept up her self-righteous attitude, but we went home without further drama that night. I thought maybe things would blow over, that she'd move on to something else to nitpick. The problem is, Tara never really moves on. She just waits for her next opening. A few weeks after the hospital incident, our family hosted a dinner at this cozy Italian restaurant to celebrate Aunt Valerie's recovery. Everyone was supposed to be in good spirits. I felt a hint of trepidation though, because Tara's glare still lingered on me. She sat across the table, swirling her water glass ominously, as if rehearsing how to pounce the moment I slipped up. It reminded me of a cat waiting for a mouse to scuttle a little too close. I couldn't but brace myself. I remember that the conversation started off politely enough. Aunt Valerie joked about the physical therapy she was going through, Dad complimented the restaurant's lasagna, and Mom asked if anyone had seen the new art exhibit downtown. All very ordinary topics. Yet Tara found a way to make it about me. She asked in this condescending tone if I'd found any more hospital cafeterias to frequent in my spare time. My face burned and the rest of the family went quiet. Dad coughed into his napkin, clearly uncomfortable. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, something snapped. It wasn't so much the insult itself, but the brazen way she delivered it. She was trying to humiliate me in front of everyone, plain and simple. So I asked if she'd found any more puzzle games to occupy her time while the rest of us worried about Aunt Valerie. She glared. That was the moment dinner took a sharp turn. Tara slammed her fork down, accusing me of being petty, and I shot back that she'd started it. Aunt Valerie mumbled something about everyone needing to calm down and enjoy the meal, but the tension was impossible to ignore. I got up to take a breather, figuring a short walk outside might help me cool off. That's when I realized my bike, which I'd leaned against the restaurant's side wall, was missing. At first, I thought maybe it had been moved or stolen by some random kid. But soon enough, I got word from a panicked waiter that a tall girl with dark hair had marched out in a rage, grabbed the bike, and flung it into the pond behind the restaurant. My heart pounded as I stepped onto the back patio, scanning the water under the moonlight. I was speechless. There it was, half submerged, handlebars sticking out of the murky water, the rest sinking deeper by the second. A small crowd gathered, and one of the waiters offered to help me fish it out. But I didn't want help. I wanted answers, and I wanted vengeance. My bike wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and seeing it tossed away like garbage lit a fuse inside me. Tara stepped out onto the patio behind me, and when our eyes met, I swear sparks flew. I shouted, demanding she explain herself, and she just folded her arms, saying she was tired of my attitude. Dad rushed out, looking utterly mortified, while Mom hovered in the doorway as if unsure whose side to take. Aunt Valerie kept wringing her hands. Suddenly, it struck me that this was the pattern of our entire family dynamic. Tara caused havoc, and everyone tiptoed around her. Seething. Back inside, the restaurant's manager apologized for the disturbance, but all I could think about was how Tara had crossed a line. Destroying my property was more than just a temper tantrum, it was a declaration of war. Dad tried to make us both apologize as if it was some sibling spat, but I refused. My self-respect wouldn't allow me to pretend everything was okay. Tara shot me a smug grin that made my stomach churn. I left the dinner early, ignoring my parents' calls to return. As I walked down the sidewalk, the anger in my chest felt radioactive. In my head, I kept replaying Tara's smirk. She was so sure she'd get away with it that I'd be the bad guy for causing a scene. But I vowed right then I would not rest until I taught her a lesson she'd never forget. My rage demanded retaliation immediately. Over the next few days, I stewed in silence, formulating a plan. An apology wouldn't cut it this time. Tara had a habit of taking what she wanted without consequences, largely because our parents always smoothed things over. But I was done letting her off the hook. First, I wanted her to feel the loss of something she treasured. That was the only way she'd ever understand the gut punch I experienced seeing my bike sink into grimy water. Tara's prized possession was her vintage record collection, a series of vinyls she showcased on social media whenever she wanted to appear sophisticated. She kept them meticulously organized in her room at our parents' house. I knew messing with them would hit her hard, but I also knew I had to be smarter than just storming in and destroying them like she had my bike. I needed subtlety. She had to learn. I spent hours researching how to warp vinyl records without making it obvious. If I just broke them, she'd know it was me, but slight heat damage, now that could be written off as poor storage. So one afternoon, I waited until I knew she'd be out with friends. Then I slipped into her room, carefully took out select records from the middle of each sleeve, and placed them on a towel near a space heater. I didn't want to ruin all of them, just enough so that every time she tried to play her cherished music, she'd hear warping and scratches. It felt calculated, maybe even cruel. But I couldn't forget the sight of my bike drowning in that pond. I set the heater's timer and left, heart pounding, anticipating how she'd react. I felt no remorse, only a dark satisfaction I'd never experienced before. Vengeance fueled my courage. Of course, the fallout came sooner than I expected. That very evening, Tara came home and decided to unwind with her music. Within minutes, she was screaming obscenities. I heard her stomping around upstairs. Then she barged into my room, waving a warped vinyl like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom. She accused me outright, but I feigned ignorance, telling her maybe she should store her precious records better. She looked ready to claw my eyes out. Mom and Dad rushed in, demanding to know what was happening. Tara pointed at me, hysterical, insisting I was the culprit. I shrugged, mocking her in the same dismissive way she'd mocked me. Dad's brow furrowed, but he didn't say anything. Mom tried to calm Tara, but Tara was inconsolable. I'm not sure if they believed her, but their eyes told me they suspected I had done it. I stood defiant, unrepentant. Things only escalated after that. Tara tried to rally Mom and Dad against me, repeating her accusations over and over. She wanted punishment, a confession, something to validate her outrage. But neither of my parents took decisive action. They were too used to the constant drama between us, too weary to choose a side. Meanwhile, I refused to break. After all, she hadn't confessed to tossing my bike in the pond. Why should I admit anything? Seeing her frustration balloon was oddly gratifying, like I was finally leveling the playing field. I realized I no longer cared about preserving any kind of peaceful relationship with her. At this point, it was about retribution and not letting her walk all over me. If she wanted to escalate the feud, I was ready. In fact, I found myself hoping she would, so I could give it back harder. She would deserve it. I took no pleasure in the tension it created for Mom and Dad, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. Tara had done the unforgivable, and I refused to let her off easy. A few days later, I spotted her in town at a coffee shop with some of her friends. She was laughing, flipping her hair, enjoying herself. It lit another spark inside me, reminding me that she could shrug off any guilt or remorse for her actions. I followed them at a distance, just observing. It wasn't stalking exactly, but I wanted to see how she behaved when she thought no one was watching. She looked carefree while I was still nursing a deep wound. The injustice of it festered in me, fueling my resolve. If she could move on so easily, maybe she needed another reminder that I wasn't finished. Retribution was my only solace now. That evening, I called up an old friend, Mark, who worked security at a local bike shop. We chatted about random things before I slipped in a request for a favor. I wanted a small, discreet tracking device that I could place on Tara's car. Mark was hesitant, but eventually he agreed. My plan wasn't fully formed yet, but I figured it might come in handy to know where Tara went. She had blindsided me with the bike incident, so I wanted to be the one controlling the narrative this time. Within a day, Mark got me the device. Late that night, I crept into our parents' driveway and stuck it under Tara's rear bumper. My heart hammered in my chest, but the sense of taking power back was exhilarating. I no longer wanted to be the victim of her manipulations. I would anticipate her moves, counter them, maintain control. As the days passed, I tracked Tara's whereabouts on my phone, mostly out of curiosity. I wasn't sure how to leverage the information yet, but simply knowing where she went gave me a psychological advantage. If she was meeting friends, I knew. If she was heading to the mall, I knew. The sense of control eased my lingering rage, but it also made me realize how far I'd let this grudge carry me. There was no turning back, though. Each time I recalled the humiliating dinner and the sight of my bike in the water, my resolve deepened. No one else seemed interested in holding Tara accountable, so it fell on me to balance the scales. And if that meant drifting into morally gray territory, well, so be it. I had no plans to forgive or forget. This was my line in the sand. I refused to step back now. One afternoon, the tracker showed Tara heading to a hospital on the outskirts of town. A strange déjà vu stirred within me, recalling the day everything had begun in that hospital cafeteria. Curious, I decided to follow her. I pulled into the parking lot just in time to see her rush inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she visiting someone? Was she ill? I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was crossing a line, but the memory of her gloating expression as my bike sank reminded me there was no line she hadn't already crossed first. So I slipped in, careful to keep my distance. After a few minutes of searching, I found her pacing outside a ward. She looked stressed, even worried. My initial thought was that maybe she had a friend in need. Then I saw her break down in tears. I stood hidden, watching silently. For a split second, empathy welled up in me. Even after everything, seeing Tara crying alone in a hospital corridor tugged at something human in my chest. But I quickly remembered the path she'd chosen, the cruelty she'd inflicted. I stayed out of sight as she composed herself and approached the nurse's station. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I watched the nurse pat her arm sympathetically. Tara looked smaller, more vulnerable. Part of me wondered if this was karma, if she was finally facing some hardship that might humble her. Then again, I recalled how she'd ridiculed me for getting a burger when Aunt Valerie was in surgery, how she'd thrown my bike into a pond. No, I decided, she didn't deserve my compassion. As I left the hospital, I felt a dark satisfaction. Now I knew she had a secret pain too, and I reveled in it vindictively. Back home, I mulled over the possibilities. If Tara was dealing with something serious, it could shift the dynamic. But I wasn't about to let her crisis overshadow the fact that she'd wronged me. Let Mom and Dad offer her comfort. I owed her nothing. Over the next few weeks, I noticed she stopped taunting me as much. Maybe she had bigger problems. I kept an eye on her movements through the tracker. Hospital visits became frequent, sometimes late at night. I never saw her bring anyone else. She was alone, facing something that clearly upset her. And strangely, I found the balance of power tipping in my favor. For the first time, she wasn't the unstoppable golden child. She was human, flawed, and possibly scared. Still, my sense of justice wouldn't let me relent. Not after what she did to me. Her tears didn't erase her betrayal of me. One night, curiosity overwhelmed me. I followed Tara into the hospital, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. I lingered in the hallway, reading signs. Oncology. My stomach sank. Was she sick? Or was she visiting someone with cancer? I found a chair in a corner and waited. Eventually, I saw her slip into a private room with a single bed. The lights were dim, and I couldn't see who occupied the bed. For over an hour, she stayed there, sometimes emerging to speak softly with a nurse. I felt a pang of guilt for prowling around like this, but I pushed it away. I recalled her smug grin at the restaurant, the sound of water sloshing against my drowning bike. Even if she was dealing with tragedy, my thirst for justice remained. Some lines can't be uncrossed. I wouldn't waver. The unpredictable ending of this twisted chapter came a week later when Tara finally confronted me, not with anger, but with desperation. She caught me in the driveway as I pulled up. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. She whispered that she needed help. For once, there was no superior sneer, no biting remark. Through stammered words, she confessed that the person in the hospital room was her best friend from college, diagnosed with an aggressive cancer. And Tara felt helpless, guilty for not being able to do more. I stood there, rigid, remembering the pond, the broken records. My entire life, Tara had been the golden child who tormented me whenever it suited her. Now she was asking for my support. I realized I had the power to twist the knife or extend a hand. The choice was mine. I refused forgiveness. Sweet revenge would remain my guiding principle.